I'd like to quickly start with, understanding one thing, right? Your product guys, we'd love to understand a bit about that one product which you love, which you use most often. Let's start with that. Ashwin? Awesome. We know from the apps what you like, so you're a foodie, love it, Swiggy. How about you?
Yeah, so apart from OLA, I probably talk about Spotify. I think that's one of the apps that's been using recently. I think really love the onboarding experience, the entire experience, which is personalized to usage. I think it's an awesome.
Awesome, love it. Monica?
For me, it would be Instagram because that's one place which tells me, oh, you need to eat this awesome looking food at the same time, reduce weight. Because so many people are so good looking out there. So yeah, that just keeps me busy sometimes.
Awesome. Did you like that answer?
Yeah.
Ketan? your Ketan product?
For me, I think it's largely, I spend a lot of time on Reddit. It's a really bad app, but I think the community in general and the kind of content you get is mind-blowing. I think in a lot of communities. So I end up spending a lot of time as a lurker on Reddit. I'm not very active.
Awesome. No, great. Thank you so much for sharing this. Just wanted to have a quick sort of an understanding what product leaders like in the market. Right? Coming straight to the topic, right? Monica, we'd love to understand how do you build an effective and efficient onboarding process leading up to a value moment in your product?
Sure. So the way I look at it is, when you design an onboarding flow, always think of what the user wants from you during onboarding. What they want is just get into the app, right? So onboarding should actually be a means to just get into the app. That's the most important thing. But at the same time, how do you get into the app frictionless and seamless is very important. In fact, every page that you add on your onboarding flow is a friction. So be very mindful adding any information that you want from the customer. Just think twice whether it's must have or nice have. Start with the minimum amount of information you need from the customer to get them started. Because all of us want to do one thing, which is introduce the customer or the user to the app and get them started. So that's the most important thing. Apart from that, I would also understand what is the scope of onboarding. Onboarding just doesn't end at registration. You should land the user into consuming the app, making sure that the user experiences what you want them to experience onto the app, which is the core loop, as you can say, right? So get them early on into the core loop of the app. By core loop, what I mean is, what is that flow which maximizes the output from the app? What is the way by which the customer can effectively use your app on an ongoing basis? So get them into the core loop. That's very important. Make sure you communicate the value proposition that your app has during onboarding such that the intent of the user matches the offering that you have. And if you are able to exceed that, that is when you create the aha moment. So I think these are some of the pointers that are important when you design an onboarding flow.
Awesome. Super insightful. I think you want to
Sure. I think just adding to the points that Monica just raised, I think when we talk about onboarding, it's important to consider that as a longer term event and not just the first time user experience in that sense. So I think most of the times when we think about onboarding, we really think about how do we onboard the user, get the relevant information and then get them started with the product. I think it's important to also consider what type of user you would want at the end of the funnel when you actually complete that journey. So it's important to have that target very clearly identified, define that with metrics, and then I would say it's important to also identify and construct those steps, not just the first one. Basically identify at what point within say first 7 days or first 14-day period, what all things would the user would need to do, and how do you construct those steps and get them towards monetizable or user who engage with you.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Ashwin, as South Asia's largest content to consumer company, how important is it to deliver a rich, relevant and seamless onboarding experience to your customers, and what do you guys do?
Sure. got like multiple streams. So there's commerce, there's content, and there's the creators. I would focus more on the commerce and content because that's where I'm involved. In e-commerce, we don't exactly have an onboarding flow. So we want the user to get right into it because I'm sure like most users are e-commerce users today. Unless you're operating in like the Bharat space where I go into vernacular or things like that, then we might need an onboarding flow. But by and large, I think we all are consumers and we would need one. But I think it's really important to give the user choices, right? Whenever they land on a platform, it could be the home page, it could be the listing page, or in our case, basically PDP, or the cart, right? So now either they like something or they don't like something, right? You always have to remember that both of those are possibilities, and respect both of them and give the user like as many pathways as possible without distracting them from the core group, as you might call it. One thing that I would add is the first interaction that you have with the product, right? I think very important. The first interaction, the first positive interaction when you're making a purchase or something like that. So ideally, you should personalize it to some extent somewhere and identify that yeah, this is your first purchase, congratulations or something like that. They're going to remember it. They're going to, and it's also like a very positive experience overall from the consumer standpoint because they're purchasing, right? So they choose this moment to purchase on your platform. That means they have some good thoughts about your platform at this moment at the very least. So get them into a rating flow, right? See if you can like solicit ratings in Facebook. Get them to recommend other users. Get feedback from them because they have fresh thoughts. They might want to talk about it. Like that. So I would say like these are other secondary aspects of onboarding. Once you have to some extent onboarded the user, you should use that in other groups.
Awesome. No, thank you for sharing a very e-commerce lens with the audience. Setal, you are at the helm of Sharechat. Would love to understand and help us understand like how do you craft your onboarding experience? How do you bring them to the value moment for a short form video platform like Sharechat?
So, I mean, largely for us, I think we understand that the user are essentially coming for entertainment, right? And for us, I think the most important thing is how do we bring that entertainment to the user as quickly as possible. So, we do not spend a lot of time in the onboarding flow itself, and as for Moj, for example, as soon as you open the app, you will basically start playing a video. And the onboarding experience is essentially then optimized in two directions, right? One, we sort of try to gather as many implicit signal as we potentially can to take a guess as what potentially the users will like when he watches that first video. And in fact, not just the first video, the first 5 set of videos. Then when in that first 5 set of videos, our sort of aim is that of course the user should like that first 5 set of videos, but if he likes that and goes beyond that, we should be learning about the user very, very quickly. And so the next set of 5 videos then become really, really important to essentially retain him for the longer term. Now, so in that first 5 set of videos, what we explicitly focus on is to tell the user, you can give us signals so that we can basically make our recommendation system easier, right? And there are fairly simple signals in that. I mean, for example, swiping a video is a very strong signal whether you like the content or not like the content, right? If you watched, let's say, 20% of the video, that means you typically did not like the content. If you watch 80%, that means you like the content. And then the double tap to like is a more explicit signal where the user explicitly saying that I like the video. So we just give that information to the users in that first 5 set of videos. The idea is that we have already taken a guess. Now with additional signals, we strengthen that guess that we are taking that these are the videos that we like and continue improving the experience after that. So as I said, if you sort of break it down into how do we optimize our onboarding experience, one, the implicit signal that we are capturing, how strong it is, how valid it is, what are the sources for that becomes really important. Then the first set of recommendations that you're given for the first 5 videos become really, really important again. And then how quickly we learn so that your long-term experience then continues after that. I think that's largely how we think about users.
Awesome. Awesome. This is such a comprehensive answer. I couldn't have had a better answer to this first questions that I asked, right? Like right from entertainment to e-learning to mobility to e-commerce. I guess we have all of that covered. This is my favorite question, right? I'm sure in your journeys you've had your fair share of mistakes that you've made. So we want folks in the audience not to make those mistakes again. So can you please share a bit, sprinkle a bit of sparkle from your sort of experience and help us understand how can people like avoid some of those mistakes? What kind of journeys that have you gone through as you were evolving your platforms?
I can probably take a shot at that. I think when you think about onboarding itself and what mistakes could happen around that. So when you think about the first time experience, there is of course a lot of new things that you brought onto the platform, to the app, and you want to basically introduce all of those features together to the user. At times that's where we miss that trick. I think we did that in some of our earlier products at Byju and even at Ruby. What we realized was there is a digestible set of content that the user would want to look within a particular session. You need to construct that in terms of steps. So you need to identify what are the high value steps. At what point should someone discover a feature, which is important as well. So I think it's important to have digestible set of say steps in each of the areas. Construct that journey overall. And another important thing is you should actually always have an objective at the end of it. Just having an onboarding journey, just to introduce a feature, probably at times misses the purpose of that. So you need to have a clear understanding of what do you want your users to get to. For example, some of the things that you shared, say how do you get signals from the user. So if you favorited a particular song on Wing, or if you favorited a particular app, how do you introduce the next set of features for them? How do you add songs to your playlist? How do you engage and get them to invest value to your app? I think those are some things wherein we miss the point at times when we just think about onboarding as that one-shot experience rather than the first goal.
Awesome, awesome. No, that's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Monica, do you want to go next?
Sure, I totally agree with you
And
on that.
I would love for a couple of more examples, specific examples, so people may take back note.
So I think I totally agree, having a reason or a purpose of onboarding is very important. Don't overwhelm the customers. I think we as product managers are so engrossed in our product, we are so biased and we are so into our product that sometimes we want to show everything that we've developed. But when you start understanding from a user's perspective, right, simplification is very important. Don't overwhelm. Another thing that I would again highlight is remove the nice to have and from your onboarding journey. Just make sure you get the bare minimum information from the user and get them started. Secondly, I would say is that be very careful of the copy or the text that you use during onboarding. Especially users, they get deterred by words like subscription. They get deterred by words like trial, stuff like that. I know, we have apps which offer a free trial and then after a certain period of time, there is a subscription. Don't put the words, which kind of deter users right in the beginning, like, subscription and, trials, etc. Because, what you lose on customers who actually could have given you 7 to 14 days of their engagement. And then you could target them in a better way. So try to be very careful of using any copy that could be detrimental for the user's journey. Last but not the least, another important thing that I have discovered, is we want to know so many things from the users, right? So a lot of times we start with certain preferences in our onboarding journey, where we start asking questions to users, do you prefer this, do you prefer that, in an attempt to kind of personalize their experience. But what we learned is users don't read. All they want to do is just get started. And so any kind of form, any kind of preferences, any kind of choice leads to a sort of a choice paralysis where you might get input but they will not be meaningful. So keep all of that to a point when it actually makes sense. So those are some of the learnings that we've also evolved, and one of the key things that we keep on doing is this screen really necessary? Do you really need this screen? Because like I said, right, every screen is a friction to the user. The user just wants to get started. So you have to just internalize that.
Awesome. No, great. Thank you so much for that. And you guys make in India for the world. So even more, it is so important to understand like different contexts, different cultures.
Absolutely.
So,
I think the best onboarding journeys are the most intuitive ones.
Sure.
So you actually need content and at times, say, pointers for the best constructed onboarding journeys. So you've identified your set of features, introduce them to the right, at the right moment to the right set of audience. I think that's how some of the best partners in the world have been able to connect.
Awesome, awesome, spot on. Seethal, you have had, like Byju's is building in India for the world, you're building based out of Bangalore for different parts of India, different cities of India, different towns of India. So what can you share of your experience, the mistakes that you made, how have you learned from those mistakes?
I think largely, very earlier on, at least in my journey in Sharechat, I think a big realization was that like you don't know anything about the user, right? And so do not go with Western standards or generally what a lot of product gyan that is given out there in the world, don't assume that is true. Experiment a lot and try to understand your users. I think that's fundamentally very, very important. I think because, for example, a lot of onboarding journeys in the past have been around preferences, around asking users what do you want, sign up as pieces that I want to collect your information against your account ID. We realized all of them were incorrect, right? What has helped us more is basically removing all steps and just get to the point. That's largely what the user wants. I think for us, another big learning has been around how visual the user is, as sort of Monica was pointing out, right, that users don't read. And so if you want any input from the users, make it as visual as possible so that at a glimpse they can actually understand what his choices are and take an action and move forward, right? Nobody is going to read whatever option that you are going to give them. And again, I think experiment very, very aggressively. I think one very big learning that I think is a sort of legend in the company is that at some point in time we sort of thought that why not sort of expand into, we have 14 languages, but why not sort of expand into English as well, right? It's a fairly easy thing to do. And in your onboarding experience had English as a tab and you obviously have the content to show that. It was a massive failure for us and largely what we realized was that users come in with the aspiration that okay, I want to consume English content, right? But a large portion of users click on English and then sort of come into the feed and realize that they don't like the content at all and so our retention rates are really poor. And that essentially gives us a very strong signal in terms of telling us that typically whatever you are thinking is mostly incorrect. Experiment, check with your users, talk to your users and then figure out what works or not works. I think that has been a massive learning, that product managers are essentially incorrect here in most of the cases.
No, totally love it, love it. English could have been the, like, let's add English, but the kind of response you got from your customers ultimately showed the content. Achin, what would you like to add? Have you made mistakes?
Absolutely.
Can you share a few?
I didn't know that, but yeah, I would say by and large the one mistake that I think people, that's the easiest to make is to do too many things at the same time. Right? Is like when one person overwhelms the user, it's also talking about too many things at the same time, right? So if you're an e-commerce brand, then have your positioning as very specific and very and then you have to push it to the users like throughout the journey to make sure that they understand it and then they retain it, right? And that goes pretty much for everything. So if you have a product page, then you talk about the product, right? You don't talk about what other offers you have, or like basically don't talk about everything at the same time. There could be like so that's one mistake and this mistake is made like on the product and like in terms of how you prioritize things. You pick up too many things at the same time, and then as a team you don't know what it is that you're like prioritizing today. So it has to be very transparent. Like if you're committing to something, the user should also know that you are committing to this at the end of the day, and not everything, but like a large part of it. And so you know that everyone is on the same page now, and like this is a problem that we are solving. I would say like that's one, and the other is like experiment and learn is definitely like always the right thing to do. But not everyone has the bandwidth for it, so very often you have to make trade-offs, and that's a continuous discussion I'm sure of companies of all scale. Smaller companies might not even be a conversation, might not be happening. Larger companies it might be a conversation, and like very large companies it will always happen. So at like a medium or at a growth phase, it will always be a discussion. Do you want to experiment this or not? So how do you take that call when you have to take it like with intuition? I've seen, I've been part of many decisions where it's like, this is what we want user to do, and this is going to drive the user, let's say, forward the funnel, and yeah, that's it. Like, let's just, and it's always like every interaction is a give and take between the user and the product, right? So whenever the user interacts, they're expecting something. You are, I think, always better off giving the user what they want, right? And very often users don't want freedom. Give them freedom. Let them go to any part of the product that they want to go. Some things are a no-no, like let's say deep into the checkout, we don't want the user to go back to the homepage directly or something like that. So those rules are, for example, set by convention. You can see that most of the people are not like doing it. It's okay to follow. There's some exceptions, but you have to think through those exceptions and know that it's okay to make those exceptions. Otherwise, just kind of think from the user standpoint and observe the user that kind of reduce friction at every point.
Awesome. I'm sure by the time you're answering, other members of the panel, they are thinking of a couple of experiments already, right? Let's come to the crux of it, right? Like one of the key things that companies want to drive is monetization and retention. So maybe I'll start with you. Can you help us understand an effective onboarding process, an effective initial value moment that comes across early on in the experience? How does that translate to longer term retention and monetization?
Sure. I think we've had certain examples of things how we thought about, say, these high value actions within the user journey, within products such as Adobe. So we were actually building this creative cloud desktop app at that point, thinking about how do we get people to basically use and engage with all the sorts of products that Adobe provides within the creative cloud. At that point, we realized that it's important people really take these baby steps, get tutorials, engage with the product, at least start opening up the app from that perspective. So if you when using Photoshop, there's a very, very difficult learning curve that you go through. So we typically identify what are the first high value actions that you go ahead with. So basically, if you've created the first say image and transformative way edited that. That is the action that you actually identify as something that signals to you that the user has engaged with your app itself. At that point, you're probably right in the moment to actually start engaging them for monetization, subscriptions, upgrades, and those kind of things, process. So it's important to identify those specific actions and how does that signal with respect to their intent and investment with respect to products.
Love it. You're threading between your own company and giving us perspective from a B2B business as well. So really appreciate that. We at Next Panel can take a few nuggets from them as well. Thanks for sharing. Monica, you want to go next?
Yes, from a retention perspective, monetization, of course, for us at least, and Byju, it's a different flow altogether. So, from a retention perspective, I would again go back to my introduction. One of the key learnings that we keep seeing is that when you do a good job introducing the user to the core loop, like you do this, you get this delight, and this is what you need to do. That actually sets the stage for the user to come back the next day. So whenever you're looking at retention, right, start from what you do on day zero, which is just if you do a very good first-time user experience followed by a fulfilling day zero experience, that paves the way for not just D1 retention. It also pays for, a very good, based on what we've seen, a very good 60-day, 90-day retention. Because, what we've seen is, if the user gets into the core loop and is able to extract the maximum value from it, and if you do a good job telling the user that this is what you need to do, because you know what is the best way the customer should, move into your app, then we have seen that it really impacts long-term retention. So the focus of many companies has been to strengthen the first few days of the user's experience, because that just sets the stage for long-term retention.
Sure.
That is what.
Are you allowed to share a few numbers from Byju with everyone? No. Okay. Achin, the importance of re-engaging customers across value moments or touch points can't be stated enough. right? So curious to know, how do you approach it at the Glamm group? What do you do there?
So I mean, this is a very well-known kind of way to think about retention or engagement, right? How often is your product going to entice the user to come to your platform, right? So you use an Uber every day, given your lifestyle, you might use Swiggy every day or every weekend or something like that. How often are you going to use any commerce website, right? And Amazon, you might use maybe once a week or even 2 times a week, but they're Amazon, right? Not everyone will be Amazon because then they won't be Amazon. So while being in a particular vertical or so being, let's say, a cosmetics company or a personal care company or something like that, a user is probably not going to come to your platform more than, or not going to need to come to your platform once a month or once in 2 months, right? I would say fashion commerce has this advantage where users really like to browse a lot and just come back with skincare. The products are not going to change that often. The catalog pretty much remains standard. You want to do a lot of R&D before you launch a new product and so on. So that's the problem that we have. So now how do we overcome this? One, I mean, then we think more routes that we can kind of add, bring users more frequently. So we have a blog, right? Pretty active blog in terms of how do you use the product, influencers, maybe content based. Then there's a community which is a user generated community, user generated content, and also like brand led. We see a fair bit of traction there. We have some community led products as well. So we have Baby Chakra, which is just a community which also has an e-commerce platform built in now. Then we have, I mean, that's kind of the beauty of the group coming together, is a content to commerce pipeline. So we have MoEngage and now Scoop as well, which is like a content based platform. We do not see a lot of users coming directly to the apps or the homepage, but we do see a lot of browsing that is going on. The user comes from somewhere, like from a need, they Google something, they find an article, and then they stay on to browse, or they come from social media. And then we think of, okay, how do I get this user back into my commerce funnel? By either pitching it relevantly or pitching it like an ad, but making sure that they come into my commerce funnel and then see if I can entice them back into the commerce. Yeah, that's pretty much how we are kind of doing it from an organic standpoint. Other than that, CRM and push notifications are always on. Hope it's not too bothersome, but I think that's something that everyone does. I think it's very important to read that fine line on how to not annoy the user. So then again, try to come up with meaningful, pitches. So we launch a loyalty program, for example, and you will have X points that you get from every interaction. So every article you read or every article you share or every purchase you make, you will get some points. And then whenever you can do a lot of those things with the point, you get X points, and I come back to you saying that you can do so much, or those points are expiring or whatever. So basically, find ways to have meaning in your CRM journeys and not just by XYZ you have X% off. So yeah, without going overboard, but try to have something with it.
No, that's totally amazing. And we are getting more and more, right? Like, we are getting like a B2B perspective, we are getting a perspective of a group which has multiple entities and how do they work and engage their customers. Seethal, curious to know, like, churn is an important part and it's a metric, I'm sure, that keeps you awake at night. So can you help us understand, like, what do you guys do from a retargeting perspective to ensure and address the concern around churn?
Yeah, so I think what Achin sort of pointed out, right, our situation is exactly opposite that, where we want our users to open our app 6 times in a day, spend 10 minutes in every session and do this over and over again for the rest of their life, which is largely what we are aiming for. And so in that sort of a context, every video that you are showing is a potential drop-off point. And so a large amount of work that you were talking about earlier in terms of getting that recommendation system right is essentially crucial to what we do. But at the end of the day, any sort of AI engine that we do has a certain probability of success and a certain probability of failure. And for us, we want to sort of actively see why people are dropping off. For example, if they dropped off after a particular video, was it because the bouquet of content that we showed them was it aligned to what they were thinking they would find in that what is basically suited best for them. And then the other sort of problem, of course, our recommendation engine gets much better over a period of time as and when more signals come in. So the largest risk is essentially in the first session itself. Once you sort of launch the video, watch the first 2 videos, that's where I think most people end up dropping off for us. And I mean, users are brutal, right? If they've got first interaction or that first video is something that is not aligned with what kind of content they want, they will uninstall the app almost immediately. And then for us, then it starts the journey of, okay, how do I bring the user back, right? Of course, as I said, the first thing is essentially to get the first day's retention or the first session retention as high as possible. But there would always be the inevitable circumstance that certain percentage of users are essentially not coming back. Then we basically think about how to basically then re-engage these users. And then that also takes a lot of different funnels. So there are people who, for example, are not as frequent as we want. There are people who are in a day. There are people who are not as frequent in a week's time. There are people who are not as frequent in a month's time. And then there are people who are not active at all. The probability for us to re-engage is much higher when the user has just used your app. And so we end up putting a lot of focus there. The idea is that in most situations what would have happened is that the content that the user has seen is basically not liked at all. And so our thought process is that, okay, what is the content he has liked? What are popular content on our system that are from other categories? And let me sort of use that to bring them back to the platform. So that largely happens through push notifications. We are fairly aggressive, but we have found out that works pretty well for our user base. In fact, we did a lot of analysis to figure out what is the kind of ideal volume that we could put in. The other sort of big success that we have seen largely is around what we call the share funnel. Typically, most users are active on WhatsApp or Facebook or YouTube. And a big innovation that we did very earlier in our overall business journey was to introduce WhatsApp Share, which was our primary growth lever as well. I think that becomes very important to keep the Sharechat brand and the MoEngage brand in the awareness of the user, because people are, like 95% of people are active on WhatsApp, right? So if they are getting content in the Sharechat logo, the Sharechat link, that usually becomes a very solid route to bring back users to our app. So I think those two channels is what we focus on. Push notification being very hyper focused in terms of the category of users that we are going on, what period of disengagement they are at, and then personalizing very well to give them one thumbnail or one content that will bring back them to the app, and then take the journey again after that. The WhatsApp channel and the other sharing channel is much more generic in nature, where because of the nature of the app itself, our content would be there on other platforms, and how do we sort of increase that number so that it's spread everywhere and people eventually use that to get back. So those two are primary areas that we end up.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that.